I was sitting in my kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning when my phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual. My son would sometimes send quick updates, though in recent months those had become rare. I picked it up with the kind of hopeful smile only a parent understands. Maybe he was checking in. Maybe he wanted to visit. Maybe, just maybe, things were going back to how they used to be. But as my eyes scanned the words on the screen, the smile collapsed. "We need space from you. Please don't reach out anymore at all." At first I thought it was a joke. My hands trembled as I read it again and again and again until the words blurred. Space from me. Don't reach out. At all. It was like my chest caved in. I felt heat rush to my face, my throat tightening as though I couldn't breathe. The mug in my hand slipped, shattering on the floor, coffee spreading across the tiles like spilled blood. This wasn't a stranger texting me. This wasn't some coworker or neighbor. This was my son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had carried in my arms when he had nightmares. The boy I worked overtime shifts for so he could have new shoes, so he could go on school trips, so he wouldn't feel less than compared to the other kids. And now, I wasn't even worth a phone call, not even worth a conversation. Just a cold, detached message that read like a corporate memo. I dropped into a chair, the weight of the moment pressing me down. My heartbeat pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. My hands, still shaking, pressed against my forehead as tears I hadn't felt coming spilled down. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? That's the cruelty of betrayal. It doesn't just hurt. It makes you question your very worth. The weight of memories. I remember when my son was born. I was terrified, but the moment I held him, something in me shifted forever. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that instant, I promised him, promised myself, that I would always be there. And I was. Every birthday party, even when money was tight. Every school play, even when I was exhausted from work. Every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late-night homework session. I was there. I skipped vacations, new clothes for myself, even meals sometimes, just so he could have what he needed. I told myself it was worth it. Parents are supposed to sacrifice. That's love. And for years I thought he knew that. He used to say it, on Mother's Days, on Father's Days, on random nights when he'd hug me and whisper, "Thanks for everything." Those memories cut like glass now, sharp and glittering, because they remind me that once upon a time, he did love me back. Or at least he seemed to. Things started to change after he got older. At first it was small, fewer phone calls, less time spent together. "I'm busy," he'd say. "Work's been crazy." Then he started dating someone new. She was different. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive, polished. The kind of person who measures worth in bank accounts and dinner reservations, not in loyalty or love. I tried to be kind. I tried to welcome her, but it was obvious she didn't think much of me. She'd glance around my modest house with polite disdain, lips pressed in a way that told me she'd rather be anywhere else. I could feel my son slipping away. The little boy who used to climb into my lap with a stack of storybooks was gone, replaced by a man who seemed embarrassed of where he came from. Still, I never imagined he would cut me out completely. That's why the text hit so hard. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. Please don't reach out anymore at all. The finality of those words was like a blade twisting in my chest. No explanation, no conversation. Just done. I sat there for hours, staring at that message, rereading it until the words seared into my brain. My mind ran wild, replaying every interaction we'd had in the past year. Did I say something wrong? Did I offend her? Did I embarrass him somehow? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, desperate to reply, to plead, to explain. But I stopped myself, because deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. His mind was made up. And that realization broke me more than anything else. The days after the message blurred together, I'd wake up, reach for my phone, and then remember. No texts. No calls. No visits. The silence was suffocating. Every corner of my home echoed with memories of him, his laughter bouncing down the hallway, his voice calling, "Mom," or "Dad," depending on who's telling this story. Now, there was nothing. Just me, the ticking clock, and the dull ache of abandonment. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying the message in my mind like some cruel lullaby. Please don't reach out anymore at all. I started questioning myself. Was I too clingy, too old-fashioned? Did I ask for too much? But another voice in my head whispered something else, something darker. No, this isn't your fault. This is his choice, his cruelty. And once that thought rooted itself in me, it grew. There's only so much heartbreak one person can endure before something changes inside them. For me, that change came one morning, about a week after the text. I woke up, dragged myself to the bathroom, and caught my reflection in the mirror. Hollow eyes, shoulders slumped. I looked defeated, and I hated it. Because I realized that in his absence, I had let myself crumble. I had given him the power not just to walk away, but to destroy me. That's when the resolve set in. If my son didn't want me in his life, fine. But he was about to learn that actions have consequences. That you can't cut people out and treat them like trash without paying a price. I didn't know exactly what my revenge would look like yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life mourning someone who had already buried me. I didn't rush into anything. Revenge that feels satisfying isn't impulsive. It's deliberate. It's quiet. It's patient. And it's, above all, fair enough that when it lands, the audience nods and says, "Good. Finally." After that first week of waking up hollow, I stopped replaying the text and started taking inventory. I listed things on paper, not out of spite at first, but because grief is messy and I needed order. The house we'd lived in for 20 years, the attic full of memories he used to hide in, action figures, old school drawings, yearbooks, the small savings jar I'd kept tucked behind cookbooks for emergencies, the social standing in our little circle, neighbors who had once called us family, my dignity. The list looked innocuous, ordinary, but each line pulsed with meaning. Each line was a choice. He had chosen to walk away from those things, from me, with no conversation, no warning. I'd give him something to regret, not by shaming him in public, not by screaming, but by taking back the things he assumed he would get when he wanted them, and by doing it without cruelty, by doing it with a quiet, measured dignity. That was the plan. The first move, reclaiming control. I began with paperwork, the slow, mundane work that feels impossible when your hands are shaking but is strangely liberating when your hands steady. I met with an attorney, not for a scorched earth lawsuit, just clear, sensible decisions. Update beneficiaries, revise a will, make sure the house was protected. He had assumed for years that everything would fall to him because that's how it's always been. He never bothered to ask. He never sat with me and said, "What happens if?" He assumed. So I made it official. I legally designated people who actually treated me with respect. A niece who had always visited with flowers, a neighbor who'd helped shovel my walk in winter, and a local charity that helped kids get school supplies. I made decisions whisper quiet. I signed forms with a steady hand. To him, it would feel like betrayal. To me, it felt like justice. The simple moral logic that loyalty should be rewarded and cruelty shouldn't. The second move, the emotional turn. Money and papers aren't always the most satisfying revenge. Sometimes the real punch comes from reclaiming your life where they expected to find you broken. I started living differently. One morning I took a long walk in a part of town I hadn't visited in years. I noticed a little cafe with sunlight pooling on its floor like warm honey. I sat there. I read. I drank coffee that wasn't spilled on the counter because my hands were steady now. I let strangers talk to me. I let myself be seen by people who had never known my family history, by people who judged me only by my laugh or my smile. I took a painting class. My fingers at first fumbled with color, then learned. I painted a landscape of our backyard at dusk, the place his small feet once ran. But this version had brighter light, stronger trees. When I hung that painting in the living room, It didn't feel like a monument to loss. It felt like a reclaiming. It wasn't about rubbing his face in anything. It was about showing, to myself first and to the world second, that I could keep living. That his refusal to have me would not be my obituary. The third move, a small public sting. Sometimes justice tastes sweetest when it's inevitable. A few months later, I heard on social media, the small-town grapevine, that my son and his partner were hosting a housewarming party. He had moved into a place twice the size of ours. New furniture, new friends, new life. Inside, a small competitive voice wanted to post one thing. Good for him. But I didn't. I let the town chatter. I let the image of their glossy life spread, and then, gently, I positioned myself so it would crack. I invited the neighbors, the ones who had been loyal over the years, to a modest garden tea. I served the best lemon cake I had ever baked. People came, they sat in my yard with son on their knees, and they laughed. They asked about me, they told stories. Someone asked casually, "Did you know he's moved into the new place on Maple?" Another said, "He took the old oak swing from your yard, didn't he?" A neighbor shook his head. "No, he didn't touch that," he asked, "but you said it belonged here." Those whispered exchanges weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They told a story. That the person who had walked away hadn't taken everything. He had left the things that mattered. He had left the people who mattered. And while he was showing off a new couch, the small community that mattered to me continued to respect me. He saw the photos of my garden tea. He wasn't thrilled. That little sting, I'll admit, I felt it, but it was small, measured, complete. And then came the day I'd both dreaded and imagined. His girlfriend, now fiancé apparently, messaged me, curious and clipped, about a family heirloom, the old watch my father had given me. She asked politely if it could be transferred somehow. She implied my son had an emotional attachment to it and would like it. I didn't answer her first message. Instead, I called him. My voice was calm. My hands were calm. This time, the shaking feeling in my chest had been replaced by a quiet steel. "Why did you send that text?" I asked, not an accusation, but a question one asks when one needs a truth. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause people take when they rearrange an excuse. "You know why," he said finally. "It's for the best. We need space. It's complicated." Complicated. The word sounded small in my ears. I pictured all the late nights and scraped knees, all the times I'd turned up at halftime with a soggy jacket and a big grin. Complicated was a neat house with white walls, I thought. A ring on a finger that required no explanation. "So you want the watch?" I asked. "Did you ask for it like a son or like a renter?" There was anger now. Entitlement. "You can't do this," he said. "I grew up in that house. Those things are mine." I laughed. A short, incredulous sound. "Those things are mine." I mirrored back to him. "I kept them for decades. I paid for them. I preserved them." You walked out with a text message. The conversation ended with him hanging up. On my end, I felt a strange release, as if an old wound had finally been cut open and cleaned. He was angry. He was shocked. He expected me to beg. He expected me to fall back into being the doting parent who would please him, whatever he demanded. He had been wrong. The payoff, the moment of truth. A week later, I sold the watch. Not in anger, not to humiliate. I sold it because the sentimental weight of it had become different. It no longer felt like a relic of our shared past in the way it once did. It felt like a symbol of a relationship that had calcified and would not mend itself by sitting in a drawer. The buyer was a collector from another town. He paid a price that made my stomach drop and my eyes sting. I took the check. I put half into the savings account I'd told no one about and used the other half to fund a trip I'd been dreaming of for years. A week on the coast, the sound of waves at night, a small hotel with sea glass in the shower, and a book on the bedside table. I posted nothing. I told no one. But the fact that I had sold it and spent the money on my life, on my happiness, not his, was the real point. The act of turning something he'd considered inevitable into concrete freedom felt unexpectedly triumphant. When he realized the watch was gone, when a cousin texted him that a collector had posted the same design online, he called me frantic. "Where is it?" he demanded. "It's gone," I said, plainly, calmly. "I sold it." "I can't believe you'd sell family things," he said. "You owe me." "You owe me?" I echoed. "You were the one who told me not to reach out. You were the one who chose distance. You were the one who made the relationship transactional the moment you decided to be polite to strangers and disrespectful to your parent." That silence on the phone lasted a fraction of a second, but it was long enough for me to feel the scales tip. There was no dramatic public collapse, no viral post, no explosive shouting match. Instead, there was quiet. The sound of a young man finally understanding he had lost something through his own choices. The sound of a home echoing with what he had left behind. The aftermath. What revenge really does. The best revenge, I learned, is not always about making someone pay in kind. It's about recentering your own life. It's about making decisions that restore your sense of self-worth and dignity. It's about ensuring that the world you live in rewards loyalty and punishes thoughtless cruelty in small, sensible ways. After the watch, there were more small ripples. He showed up at a family dinner expecting to be welcomed into the fold. I greeted him with politeness, a firm, courteous handshake, and a plate of his favorite pie. I did not hug him. I did not act as if the past few months hadn't happened. I answered his questions with brevity. He looked at me searchingly, as if trying to find the shape of the old parent he'd known. He found someone new, someone who had replaced history with convenience. And yet, and this mattered, he also found that the world didn't reward cruelty. Friends who had fluttered around his life began to notice the edges. The people who had known me remembered who I was. The neighbors who had once assumed his side saw that loyalty belonged to those who stood by one another. Reflection. Where the story lands. So what did I get out of it in the end? I got my life back. I got the quiet knowledge that I had not been erased. I got to look in the mirror and see someone who refused to be defined by abandonment. I got strangers smiling at me in a cafe, a neighbor bringing over soup in winter, a niece calling more often because she saw that family means more than convenient closeness. And most of all, I got the internal permission to live for myself, not as an unpaid chapter in someone else's book. If there's a moral here, it isn't revenge is the answer. It's this: dignity is. Boundaries are. Saying no, legally, emotionally, repeatedly, is sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of what they've lost. Before the betrayal, before the text, there was a life. And in that life were sacrifices, some small, some so large they carved trenches in my soul. I remember the winters most vividly. The furnace would groan, old as the bones of the house itself, and I would bundle myself in sweaters so he could sleep with the heater on in his room. He never knew. He never needed to. His little hands would be warm when I tucked him in, and that was enough. I remember the way he used to light up when I picked him up from school. His backpack always looked too big for his frame, bouncing as he ran toward me. He'd shove crumpled papers into my hands, his eyes sparkling as if each drawing were a masterpiece destined for a museum, and I treated them that way. I taped them on the fridge like priceless art. I remember birthdays when money was so tight I had to skip meals. I told myself, he doesn't need to know hunger. That's my burden, not his. And when he blew out the candles, when his laughter filled the room, I believed every skipped meal had been worth it. Parenthood is invisible labor. It's sacrifice no one sees. And that invisibility is the cruelest part of betrayal. Because when they leave, they don't remember the nights you stayed awake with them when they had the flu. They don't remember the shoes you patched, the bills you juggled, the tears you swallowed so they wouldn't see fear in your eyes. They remember nothing. That, I think, was the heaviest stone on my chest after his text. Not that he left, but that he left blind to everything that had held him up all these years. The antagonist revealed. As the months passed, the shape of my son, the man he had become, grew sharper in my mind. He wasn't always cruel. But cruelty grows like mold in the corners of a house. It doesn't show until it spreads. His girlfriend, later fiancée, fed that mold. She didn't sneer outright. No, she was subtler. She would suggest he call less often. She would make jokes about clingy parents at parties. She would bring up her own family's wealth, their vacations, their taste in wine, then glance at me with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. And he followed. He mirrored. He began to echo her disdain. Where once he called me mom or dad with warmth, now he used clipped tones. Where once he'd ask for advice, now he rolled his eyes. I knew I was losing him, but I didn't know he was preparing to cut me off completely. Looking back, I realize betrayal rarely comes in a single act. It's a slow drip, a corrosion. The text was only the final blow, not the beginning. Community echoes. In small towns, word travels faster than the wind. Neighbors see, hear, whisper. Some pitied me. Some judged me. Some quietly sided with him. But others, the ones who mattered, rallied. Mrs. Jensen, who lived 2 doors down, knocked one evening with a pot of soup. She didn't say anything, just handed it to me with a look that said, "You're not invisible." My niece, Sarah, started calling weekly. At first I thought it was pity, but she told me, "No, it's respect. I know what you've done for him, and I won't let you sit alone." These small gestures stitched me back together. They also built a quiet, subtle stage where my son's betrayal would become visible. He thought silence erased me, but silence only amplified my presence among those who still cared. Revenge, the legacy, decision. The watch was only the first step. The real revenge came in the form of legacy. Parents plan for the future. We imagine who will carry our story, who will inherit the things we leave behind. My son assumed it would be him. He assumed everything: the house, the savings, the small pieces of jewelry, the books, the photos. So I changed it, not out of spite, but out of fairness. I sat down with my attorney again and revised everything. My niece would inherit the family photo albums. The neighbor who shoveled my walk would get the furniture he once admired. The savings would go to charity, kids who reminded me of him when he was small, kids who needed what he had once needed. My son? Nothing. I left a letter, though, not of bitterness, but of clarity. You once told me not to reach out at all. I have respected your wishes, and with that same respect, I have ensured my legacy goes to those who reached back. The climax, the family dinner. It happened months later, at a family gathering. He arrived late, wearing a suit too sharp for the occasion, his fiancée by his side like a queen surveying peasants. He expected warmth. He expected forgiveness. He expected the old rhythm, where I would melt at the sight of him and pretend nothing had happened. But I didn't. I greeted him with a polite smile, a handshake, no hug, no lingering, just courtesy. The room noticed. Conversations shifted. His fiancée's face tightened. He laughed too loudly, trying to fill the gap, but the gap was clear. He was the outsider now. When dessert came, he asked casually about the house, about plans for the future. I looked him in the eye, calm, steady. "I've already made my plans," I said. "The house is going to someone who values it. The things inside are spoken for. My future is secure." His fork froze mid-air. The color drained from his face. His fiancée's smile cracked. The table fell silent. Everyone understood what wasn't said. And in that silence, justice landed. He left early that night, his fiancée's heels clicking like hammers on the floor. He didn't say goodbye. I watched him go, my heart strangely light. Not happy, not gloating, just free. Because revenge, I realized, isn't always about making them suffer. Sometimes it's about removing their power to hurt you ever again. Sometimes it's about making sure they understand that betrayal doesn't come without consequence. And as I washed the dessert plates, I smiled for the first time in months. A real smile, a smile of peace. There's one memory that refuses to fade, no matter how hard I try. It was second grade. He had a science fair project due, and we didn't have the money for the flashy materials other kids used. Their parents bought shiny boards, expensive kits, even pre-made volcanoes that hissed and smoked. But all I had was cardboard, some old paint, and 2 nights' worth of lost sleep. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, scissors dull from years of cutting coupons, shaping cardboard into a volcano. I mixed baking soda and vinegar so many times my hands reeked of it for days. The next morning he walked into that fair with his head high. His project didn't shine under the lights, but when the vinegar bubbled over, his smile was pure magic. And when he won second place, he ran into my arms yelling, "We did it, Dad!" As if I had been standing right there beside him on the stage. Those were the moments that kept me alive, the ones that whispered, "It's worth it. Keep going. Keep sacrificing. He needs you." I replay that memory often now. Not because it comforts me, but because it reminds me of the fracture. The boy who once believed we were a team is not the man who later erased me with a text. As time went on, his fiancée's presence grew darker, heavier. She wasn't cruel with words. She was cruel with absence. At dinners, she'd look at her phone while I spoke. At holidays, she'd arrive late, leave early, or sit in silence as if waiting for the event to end. One Thanksgiving, I set the table with my best china, plates chipped from years of use, but polished to shine. She arrived, looked down, and whispered to him, loud enough for me to hear, "Do people still use this kind of thing?" He laughed. He actually laughed. That was when I first realized the boy who once defended me on the playground when kids mocked my patched shoes had grown into a man who now mocked me himself, for sport. At church, whispers turned into nods of respect. The man who had once been seen as pitiful now carried himself differently, straighter, calmer, quieter. At the market, neighbors lingered to chat as if sensing the shift. They asked about the house, about my health, about my plans, not out of gossip, but out of genuine care. And at one point, I overheard something that sealed my resolve. A neighbor's teenage daughter was talking to her mother in the aisle behind me. She said, "I hope when I grow up I have someone like him as a parent, someone who doesn't give up." I walked out of that store lighter than I'd felt in years. The family dinner where I announced my inheritance decision wasn't the end. It was just the spark. News traveled, word spread, and soon his fiancée's family knew. They weren't pleased. I had heard whispers that they had expected my modest estate to help their plans. A house they wanted to flip, money they wanted to pad their own accounts. When they realized none of it was coming their way, the cracks between my son and his fiancée began to show. She pulled back. He scrambled to patch things up. And one day, months later, I got a letter. From him. Not an apology, not yet. Just a crack in the armor. "Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this. You've always been there for me. Why are you turning against me now?" I didn't reply, because the truth was simple. I hadn't turned against him. I had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. The family dinner where I announced my inheritance decision wasn't the end. It was just the spark. News traveled, word spread, and soon his fiancée's family knew. They weren't pleased. I had heard whispers that they had expected my modest estate to help their plans. A house they wanted to flip, money they wanted to pad their own accounts. When they realized none of it was coming their way, the cracks between my son and his fiancée began to show. She pulled back. He scrambled to patch things up. And one day, months later, I got a letter from him. Not an apology, not yet. Just a crack in the armor. "Dad, I don't understand why you're doing this. You've always been there for me. Why are you turning against me now?" I didn't reply. Because the truth was simple. I hadn't turned against him. I had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. When he was 16, he got his first car, a rusty old sedan that barely held together, but to him, it was freedom. He thought I bought it with savings. He thought I had money tucked away somewhere, like other dads. What he never knew was that I picked up a second job at the factory. Night shifts, 12 hours on my feet, the kind of labor that leaves your back screaming and your hands swollen. I'd stumble home in the morning, shower, and head to my day job like nothing had happened. For 3 months, I lived like a ghost. barely sleeping, eating meals out of vending machines, just so I could hand him those keys. He never asked, never wondered. He just grinned and drove off. At the time, I didn't mind. His joy was payment enough. But now I look back and wonder if shielding him from the truth was my biggest mistake. Maybe if he had known what that car cost me, not in money, but in years of my life, he would have valued me differently. First signs of entitlement. The first real crack came in college. I visited his dorm one weekend, bringing groceries. The cupboards were empty, and I knew he was too proud to ask. I loaded the fridge while he was out with friends. When he came back, instead of gratitude, I got a sigh. "Dad, you didn't need to do that. People are going to think I can't take care of myself." His friends laughed. One of them joked, "Man, your dad's like your personal butler." And my son, my boy, didn't defend me. He laughed with them. That laugh stung more than the text message years later, because it was the first time I felt the shift, from father to servant. The fiancé's family. By the time she came into the picture, the ground was already cracked. She just widened it. Her parents were wealthy, the kind of people who wore designer shoes to backyard barbecues. At our first dinner together, her father looked around my modest house, smiled politely, and said, "Charming. Very nostalgic." Nostalgic. As if my life, my home, was just a relic from some bygone era. I caught my son's eye, waiting for him to step in, to say, "This is my dad's home and it's enough." But he didn't. He just kept eating. That was the night I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just drifting away, he was trading up. The text revisited after the infamous message. "Don't contact me anymore." I must have reread it 100 times, sometimes with anger, my fists clenching until my knuckles went white. Sometimes with grief, tears blurring the screen. Sometimes with disbelief, my brain whispering, "This can't be real. Sons don't do this, not to their fathers." But each time the result was the same, silence. He never followed up, never explained, never softened the blow. It was a guillotine, clean and final. At least, that's what he thought. Wrestling with revenge. When the idea of revenge first sprouted, I hated myself. What kind of father plots against his own child? What kind of parent even entertains the thought of punishment, of stripping him of what he once expected to inherit? But then I reminded myself, he had already done the unthinkable. He had erased me. And revenge wasn't about hurting him, not really. It was about reclaiming myself, about proving, if only to me, that I wasn't disposable. Still, guilt gnawed at me. There were nights I paced the floor, muttering, "Am I a monster? Am I proving him right?" But then I'd remember the science fair, the night shifts, the car, the groceries, and the guilt would fade, replaced by something sharper, something cleaner. Justice. Community reaction. When whispers of my inheritance decision spread, people treated me differently. At the diner, old friends clapped me on the back. "Good for you," one said. "Blood doesn't mean loyalty." At church, the pastor pulled me aside. "You're teaching people that respect is earned, not given." For years, I had felt pitied, seen as weak, disposable. But now I felt respected, not for money, not for revenge, but for refusing to be stepped on any longer. It was intoxicating. His first attempt back. It wasn't long before he reached out again, not with love, not with apology, with calculation. "Dad, maybe we should talk. I think we misunderstood each other." I could hear her voice behind his words, or worse, her father's. They had done the math, realized what they lost. I didn't reply. A week later, "Dad, I miss you. Can we meet?" Still, silence. 2 weeks after that. "Look, I know we've had our issues, but we're family. Family forgives, right?" That one nearly broke me, because once upon a time I would have said yes. Once upon a time I would have bent until my spine snapped. But not anymore. This time, I was the one choosing silence. The charity event months later, I attended a charity dinner, the same one my niece Sarah had invited me to. The hall sparkled with laughter, with music, with the hum of people who actually cared about building something bigger than themselves. They handed me a plaque that night. Not for money, not for status, but for consistency, for showing up, for investing in kids who had nothing, the way I once had nothing. As the applause washed over me, I realized something. Revenge had transformed into something better. It wasn't about making him hurt anymore. It was about proving to myself, to the world, that I still mattered, that I could give, even when someone had taken everything from me. And that realization was worth more than any inheritance, any house, any property. Not long after, I heard rumors. His relationship faltered. Her family pulled back support. He had overextended himself financially, banking on the idea that my estate would cushion him. When it didn't, reality came crashing down. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. But I did feel something settle inside me, a quiet balance. Not because he was suffering, but because life had proven what I already knew. You cannot build happiness on BI. I'll never forget the night of his 4th grade play. He was a tree, not a lead role, not even a speaking part. Just a boy in green construction paper, standing stiffly on stage. But to me, he was a star. I left work early, despite my boss's glare. I sprinted 3 blocks to the school, my boots caked in mud, shirt untucked, sweat dripping down my back. When the curtain rose and he shuffled into view, I clapped louder than anyone in that gymnasium. He didn't even see me in the crowd, but I saw him. And in that moment I thought, I will never let him feel small. Not if I can help it. Funny thing is, years later, he'd tell people he raised himself. As if I hadn't been there in every audience, every bleacher, every hard chair, and every auditorium. Invisible, but present. Always present. Trail. High school graduation was another milestone. His gown hung crooked, cap too big for his head. When they called his name, my chest nearly burst with pride. I shouted, whistled. The people in front of me turned, annoyed. But I didn't care. My boy was walking across that stage. Afterward, I wrapped him in a hug. I'm proud of you, son. He shrugged, embarrassed. His friends were nearby, smirking. Dad, chill. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. To me, it was everything. To me, it was proof I hadn't failed him. That was the first time I felt the sting of being an afterthought in his life. The beginnings of the iceberg that would later sink us both. He got his first real job at 19, a retail gig at a clothing store. He called me after his first paycheck, excitement spilling through the phone. Dad, I bought you something. He showed up with a tie, cheap fabric, clashing colors, but to me it was priceless. I wore it to work the next day, proudly telling everyone, my son bought this for me. What I didn't know then was that he'd put it on a credit card. He didn't actually buy it. He borrowed against the future. And that, I think, was the first time he lied to me. A small lie, harmless on the surface, but a seed, a sign of the man he would become, more concerned with appearances than truth. Looking back, I can see the pattern. The way he stopped introducing me as his father, and instead just said, "This is my dad." A title, not a bond. The way he rolled his eyes when I told old stories, as if my memories were inconveniences. The way he started saying I instead of we. Little betrayals, quiet ones, the kind that erode trust slowly, like water carving stone. By the time the text came, it wasn't an explosion. It was the final crack in a dam that had been leaking for years. I spent many nights asking myself hard questions. Did I raise him wrong? Did I spoil him by shielding him from my struggles? Should I have let him see me break more often, so he knew what it cost to keep him whole? Maybe, maybe not. Parenting doesn't come with a manual, but here's what I do know. No matter how many mistakes I made, I loved him. Fiercely, fully, unconditionally. And that should have been enough. A few months before the text, I went to see him. He had moved into a new apartment with his fiancée. I brought a housewarming gift, a set of tools. Practical, reliable, the kind of thing every man needs. He opened the box, frowned, and said, thanks, I guess. But we don't really need this kind of stuff. We just call maintenance. She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. I stood there, gift in hand, realizing that the practical lessons I had tried to teach him, self-reliance, humility, gratitude, were meaningless in this new world of convenience and disdain. That was the last time I saw him before the message. After the text, silence stretched into weeks. At first I checked my phone constantly. Maybe he'd reconsider. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe it was just heat-of-the-moment anger. But no apology came. The house grew quieter. The clock ticks louder, nights longer. I'd catch myself setting 2 plates at the table out of habit, or glancing at the phone when it buzzed, heart leaping, only to see spam calls. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, crushing. And in that silence, something shifted. I realized waiting for him was a prison. Revenge, on the other hand, was a key. It happened one evening as I sat on the porch. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple. I thought about all the sunsets I'd watched with him, fishing trips, camping weekends, backyard barbecues. I thought about how he had once looked at me with trust, with admiration, and how now he looked at me with disdain. And I whispered, no more. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more begging for scraps of his affection. If he wanted space, I would give it to him, but I would fill that space with something better, dignity. And so the plan began. My revenge was never about screaming matches or public confrontations. It wasn't about lawsuits or scandals. It was simple, quiet, surgical. I rewrote my will. I redirected my savings. I built new connections with people who actually cared. Every signature, every meeting, every document I signed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By the time I was done, he wasn't just cut out financially. He was cut out emotionally, spiritually. He had asked for space, and I gave him more than he ever imagined. Near breaking point. There was one night, though, when I almost caved. I found an old photo album while cleaning, pictures of him as a boy, birthday cakes, scraped knees, Christmas mornings. I sat on the floor, album open on my lap, sobbing until my chest hurt. A voice inside me whispered, "Call him. End this." One phone call could fix everything. I reached for the phone, and then stopped, because another voice, stronger, cut through the haze. If he wanted to fix it, he'd be here. He isn't, and that's your answer. I put the phone down, and I never picked it up again. The more distance I put between us, the stronger I became. Neighbors stopped pitying me. They started admiring me. Friends stopped saying, "I'm sorry." They started saying, "I respect you." And for the first time in years, I started saying something to myself that I had forgotten how to say. "I'm proud of you." Not proud of him, proud of me. And that shift, that one simple change, was the real revenge. People think revenge is about making the other person suffer. But real revenge is standing tall when they expected you to stay on your knees. My son thought I'd beg. He thought I'd chase. He thought I'd crumble. Instead, I rebuilt. I thrived. I lived. And now, when he looks back, he'll see not a broken father, but a man who refused to be erased. And that, I think, is justice. It took him nearly 6 months to realize what had happened. For half a year, I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no messages through friends, just silence. But then one day, a letter arrived. Handwritten. His handwriting, sharp, rushed, angry. "Dad, I don't understand why you're ignoring me. I thought we agreed we needed space. But Mom's family told me you've changed the will. They said you've cut me out. Tell me that isn't true." I stared at the letter for a long time. The ink smudged in places, as if he'd been sweating, or maybe crying. And in that moment, I felt nothing. No rush of pity, no fatherly instinct to fix it, no guilt. Just a quiet confirmation that my decision had been right. I could have written back. I could have explained that the will wasn't punishment, but protection. I could have told him that love isn't a blank check to be cashed when convenient. But instead, I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer with the others, unanswered. Because sometimes the most powerful response is silence. 2 weeks later, another arrived. This one longer. "Dad, please. I think I overreacted. I didn't mean what I said. Things just got out of hand. You know how I get when I'm stressed. Can we talk? I'll come by. We can figure this out." I read it twice, tracing each word with my finger, and for a brief moment, My heart tugged, but then I remembered all the times I had begged for scraps of respect, all the nights I'd stayed awake, worrying if he would ever see me as more than an obstacle. No, the letters were too little, too late. I placed this one in the drawer as well. It was a Sunday afternoon when he showed up at the house. I heard the knock on the door, the rhythm unmistakable. My heart leapt, then sank. Through the peephole I saw him, older, wearier, but still my son. I didn't open the door. Instead, I sat in my chair, motionless, as the knocking grew louder, then softer, then stopped. A minute later, I heard footsteps retreating down the porch, and in that silence, I whispered to myself, "You wanted space. I gave it to you." A month later, the phone rang. This time, it was his fiancée. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Do you know what you've done? He's a mess. He says you've abandoned him. Do you even care?" I let her finish. Then I said the words that had been building for months. "I cared for 30 years. I carried him, protected him, sacrificed for him. If he doesn't see that now, he never will. And I won't waste the rest of my life proving it." And I hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned one. I felt like the one walking away. Word trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. He had started telling people that I was cold, unforgiving, stubborn. But as weeks passed, the story changed. He began admitting, quietly at first, that maybe he had gone too far, that maybe asking me to give him space was really just pushing me away, that maybe he had underestimated how strong I truly was. The irony was thick. He had expected me to crumble. Instead, he crumbled without me. By this point, my affairs were airtight. The will was rewritten. Trusts were set up for people who had stood by me. A niece who visited weekly, a charity that had supported me in my darkest years, a neighbor who shoveled my driveway every winter without being asked. These were the people who would carry my legacy, not the son who had turned love into entitlement. And I felt peace in that decision. Not anger, not bitterness, peace. Tea happened at the grocery store, of all places. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard his voice behind me. "Dad?" I froze. Slowly, I turned. There he was, standing in the aisle, looking smaller somehow. For a moment, time folded. He wasn't 30-something. He was 5 again, clutching my leg, asking for candy. But then the present returned, and I saw not a boy, but a man who had thrown me away. "Hi," I said simply. His eyes darted, searching for a crack in my armor. "Can we talk?" I shook my head. "No, not here, not now." And I walked away, leaving him standing there among the dairy products, as lost as I had once been. That moment was pivotal. I realized I no longer wanted him back. I no longer needed reconciliation to feel whole. What I wanted, what I needed, was to honor myself, to protect the man who had spent decades protecting others. And in that clarity, I found something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Months later, a final letter arrived. It was different from the others, longer, apologetic, desperate. "Dad, I know I hurt you. I don't know why I said what I said. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I thought pushing you away would make me stronger, but it didn't. It just broke me. I miss you. I need you. Please, let's start over." I read it slowly, carefully. My hands didn't tremble. My eyes didn't blur. And then I set it in the drawer with the rest. Because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And trust once shattered cannot always be rebuilt. People think revenge is a moment, a slam of the door, a shouted word, a dramatic finale. But the real revenge is quieter. It's living well. It's refusing to be diminished. It's standing in the aisle of a grocery store, walking away without fear, without anger, without regret. My son wanted me to be small. He wanted me to wait in the shadows of his approval. Instead, I chose the sun. And that choice, that unshakable choice, was the greatest revenge of all. Nights are quiet now. Too quiet, some might say. There was a time when I hated the silence, when it pressed against the walls, reminding me of what I had lost. I used to fill it with television chatter, with old records, with anything to keep my mind from drifting back to him. But now I sit in the silence like it's an old friend. I brew tea. I settle into my chair. I look out the window as the sun dips below the trees, and I feel content. Because silence, I've learned, isn't emptiness. Silence is freedom when you no longer live at the mercy of someone else's approval. The drawer in my study holds them all. His words stacked neatly in envelopes. Pleas, excuses, apologies, bargaining. Some might ask why I kept them. Why not burn them? Why not rid myself of the reminders? Because they are proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I didn't imagine his rejection. Proof that, when faced with consequences, he knew. He knew what he'd done. He knew what he'd lost. Those letters are not scars. They are medals, reminders that I survived. And survival, when you've been written off by your own child, is no small victory. People romanticize unconditional love, don't they? They tell you, family is forever, blood is thicker than water, parents should always forgive. But here's what they don't say. Unconditional love without respect is slavery. What good is my love if it means accepting cruelty? What good is my forgiveness if it teaches him he can wound me endlessly without consequence? Love has to have boundaries. Otherwise, it isn't love at all. It's self-erasure, and I refuse to erase myself. Not for him, not for anyone. When people hear my story, some call it revenge. They imagine I'm sitting here laughing at his regret, savoring the idea that he finally feels what I felt. But the truth? It isn't revenge. Not really. It's reclamation. It's taking back the years I spent waiting for scraps of kindness. It's saying, no more. If he sees it as punishment, that's his burden. If the world calls it revenge, so be it. But I call it dignity. Do I still love him? In some strange, unshakable way, yes. Love doesn't vanish. It changes. It hardens. It learns to survive without contact. It becomes something quieter, less consuming. I love him enough to hope he finds peace, enough to wish he grows into a man who won't repeat this cycle, enough to release him from my expectations. But I also love myself enough to never let him back in. That balance, loving without allowing harm, is the hardest lesson I've ever learned. There's one thing he doesn't realize, one truth that would probably devastate him if he knew. I don't hate him. I don't wake up angry. I don't sit here plotting his downfall. No, what would crush him isn't my hatred but my indifference. Hate still ties you to someone. Hate is still energy spent on them. Indifference is freedom. And that freedom? That's what he can never take from me. I share this story not just as a father, not just as a man betrayed, but as a mirror, because I know I'm not alone. I know there are thousands, maybe millions, out there who've been told by their own blood, you are not enough. If that's you, hear me now. You are enough. You don't need their approval to validate your worth. You don't need their permission to live in peace. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not the slam of the door, but the quiet act of never knocking again. So when people ask me how I handled it, how I endured the text that shattered everything, I smile, and I tell them the truth. I honored his request. He wanted space. I gave him space, more than he ever imagined. And I sip my tea, and I watch the sun set. And I know, with absolute certainty, that I chose right. Because in the end, revenge wasn't fire. Revenge wasn't fury. Revenge was peace. And peace, my friends, is the sweetest revenge of all. And that's where the story ends. Not with shouting, not with hatred, but with silence, with dignity, with freedom. If you've ever been pushed aside, if you've ever been made to feel like your love wasn't enough, remember this. You don't need anyone's permission to walk away. You don't need to beg to be valued. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply choosing yourself. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what's the sweetest revenge you've ever seen? I'll be reading every single one. Until next time, stay strong and stay unshakable.